The Galactic Dominion had ruled the stars for 3,000 years. 12 ancient races had come together long ago to form an empire that stretched across the entire galaxy. They believed they were the most powerful beings in existence. They had explored every corner of space and found nothing that could challenge them. Their fleets patrolled 10,000 worlds, and their laws governed billions of creatures. No one dared to oppose them. Deep in their archives, there was a file about a small blue planet in an unremarkable part of the galaxy. The planet was called Earth by its inhabitants, and it was listed as World 7291C in Dominion records. The file described the native species as violent primates who spent most of their time fighting each other over patches of land and shiny metals. A monitoring satellite had been placed in orbit around Earth during what the humans called their Bronze Age. The satellite sent reports back to the Dominion once every 100 years. The reports always said the same thing. The humans were still primitive. They were still fighting. They showed no signs of ever becoming a spacefaring civilization. The Dominion had placed a quarantine around their solar system and forbidden any contact with them. The humans were considered too dangerous and too unpredictable to ever be allowed into the galactic community. They were best left alone on their little world until they eventually destroyed themselves. The last report from the monitoring satellite had arrived 200 years ago. No one in the Dominion bothered to check again. They had more important things to worry about. Admiral was one of the most respected military commanders in the Dominion. He belonged to the race, tall creatures with 4 eyes and scaled skin that changed color with their emotions. He had served in the Dominion fleet for 300 years and had never lost a battle. He sat in his command chamber aboard his flagship, the Eternal Sovereignty, reading reports about border skirmishes with a barbaric species called the. There were raiders and pirates who attacked Dominion outposts and trade ships. They were primitive compared to the elder races, but their numbers were growing. Found them annoying but not truly dangerous. He had crushed their fleets many times before, and he would do so again whenever they became too bold. His communications officer entered the chamber. She was a thin creature named, and her hands were shaking. Could see that something had frightened her badly. Reported that Monitoring Station 47 had detected unknown vessels entering Dominion space. The station commander was transmitting emergency signals across all channels. Waved his clawed hand dismissively. He assumed it was probably just scouts testing their defenses again. He told to send a patrol wing to deal with them. Shook her head. She said the station commander insisted this was different. The energy signatures did not match any known species in the Dominion database, and there were thousands of these unknown ships. Felt the first hint of concern. Thousands of ships meant an invasion fleet. But from where? The Dominion had mapped every civilization in the galaxy. There should be no unknown species capable of building such an armada. He ordered to put the station commander on screen. A frightened Dominion officer appeared, his face pale with terror. Behind him, alarms were blaring. The officer spoke quickly, his words tumbling over each other. He described a wall of ships emerging from the direction of an unremarkable spiral arm. The ships were massive and their weapons were powered up. They were not responding to any hails. Demanded to know the origin point of these vessels. The officer checked his instruments and gave an answer that made no sense. The ships had come from the quarantine zone around World 7291C. They had come from Earth. Far across space, Fleet Admiral Daniel Hayes stood on the bridge of the USS Vanguard. He was a tall man with gray hair and steady hands. He had spent his entire life preparing for this moment. Behind him, the bridge crew worked at their stations with calm efficiency. These were the best officers Earth had ever produced, and they knew exactly what they were doing. Captain Mitchell stood beside Hayes. She was younger than the Admiral but equally experienced. She had commanded warships in a dozen training exercises and simulations. Now she was commanding one in actual contact with alien species. Mitchell reported that they had crossed into Dominion territory. Their hailing frequencies remained unanswered so far, but she expected that would change soon. Hayes nodded and looked at the main display screen. Stars streaked past as the human fleet moved deeper into alien space. 10,000 warships flew in perfect formation behind the vanguard. Battleships and cruisers and carriers and destroyers filled the void like an iron tide. Each ship had been designed and built in secret over 2 centuries of preparation. Humanity had discovered faster-than-light travel in the late 21st century. Instead of announcing their achievement to the galaxy, they had chosen a different path. Their scientists had found the Dominion monitoring satellite and captured it. They had decoded its transmissions and learned everything they could about the aliens who had been watching them. They learned that the galaxy had deemed them primitive and dangerous. They learned about the quarantine that kept them trapped in their own solar system. Earth's governments had united under a single banner for the first time in human history. They put aside their differences and focused on a single goal. They would build a fleet capable of challenging the Dominion itself. They would prove that humanity deserved a place among the stars. The construction had taken place in hidden shipyards beyond Neptune. Generation after generation of engineers and scientists had worked in secret. They studied captured Dominion technology and improved upon it. They designed weapons that were more powerful and shields that were more resilient. They trained millions of soldiers and sailors to crew the vessels they built. Now that work was complete. The human fleet had emerged from hiding and entered Dominion space. They were not asking permission to join the galactic community. They were demanding it. Admiral Hayes turned to his communications officer, Commander Brooks. Brooks had spent 20 years learning every Dominion language and protocol. He was ready to translate anything the aliens might say. Hayes gave a simple order. He told Brooks to broadcast their presence on all frequencies. He wanted the Dominion to see exactly what was coming. He wanted them to understand what they had overlooked for 3,000 years. Mitchell asked if Hayes expected the Dominion to respond peacefully. Hayes shook his head slowly. He said the Dominion had spent believing they were superior to everyone else. They would not accept humanity as equals without a demonstration of strength. That was why the fleet existed. That was why every ship carried enough weapons to devastate a world. The first Dominion response came minutes later, a formal challenge demanding identification and intentions. Brooks translated it for the bridge crew. Hayes smiled without warmth. He told Brooks to send a reply. He wanted the Dominion to know that Earth's children had finally arrived, and they intended to take their rightful place among the stars. Anyone who tried to stop them would regret it. The message was sent. The galaxy was about to change forever. The Dominion responded to the human fleet with arrogance. High Chancellor, the supreme leader of the 12 elder races, refused to believe that a quarantined species could pose any real threat. He had ruled the Dominion for 5 centuries and had seen many primitive civilizations try to challenge his authority. All of them had been crushed. Sent a delegation fleet of 50 warships to intercept the intruders. He chose Ambassador Veeler to lead the mission. Veeler was a diplomat known throughout the galaxy for his condescending manner and sharp tongue. He had negotiated the surrender of dozens of rebellious worlds, and he expected this mission to be no different. Veeler traveled aboard his personal vessel, the Radiant Truth. It was an elegant ship designed more for comfort than combat. He spent the journey reviewing what little information existed about the humans. The old files described them as aggressive primates barely capable of basic tool use. He expected to find confused aliens in crude ships who would be easily intimidated by Dominion might. The delegation fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the designated coordinates. Veeler ordered his crew to establish contact with the unknown vessels. Then he looked at the main display screen and felt his confidence shatter into pieces. The human fleet filled the entire screen. Warships of incredible size stretched across space in every direction. They hung in perfect formation like a wall of steel and fire. Their hulls were covered with weapons that pulsed with barely contained energy. At the center of the armada floated a vessel so massive that it made the radiant truth look like a child's toy. Veeler's tactical officer ran the numbers with trembling hands. He counted over 10,000 human ships. Their combined firepower exceeded anything the Dominion had ever assembled in one place. Before Veeler could speak, his ship was bathed in red light. Warning alarms screamed across the bridge. The tactical officer reported that over 200 human vessels had locked their weapons on the radiant truth. Any sudden movement would result in immediate destruction. Veeler forced himself to remain calm. He opened a communication channel and spoke with all the authority he could summon. He identified himself as Ambassador Veeler of the Galactic Dominion. He declared that the unknown vessels had entered sovereign territory. He demanded that they identify themselves and state their intentions or face immediate destruction. The response came seconds later. A human face appeared on the display screen. Veeler saw a creature unlike anything in Dominion records. The human was tall with gray hair and steady eyes. He wore a uniform covered in medals and insignia. He showed neither fear nor respect. The human identified himself as Fleet Admiral Daniel Hayes of the United Earth Navy. He said they were humanity, the species the Dominion had quarantined 3,000 years ago. He announced that they had come to declare their presence to the galaxy. Veeler stared at the human in disbelief. His mind struggled to process what he was hearing. The primitive savages from World 7291C had somehow built a fleet that dwarfed anything the Dominion could assemble. It was impossible. It violated everything the elder races believed about themselves and their place in the universe. Veeler argued that the humans had been classified as primitives. Dominion records showed no technological capability beyond basic metalworking. How could they have built such an armada? Hayes smiled, but there was no warmth in his expression. He explained that Dominion records were 200 years out of date. Humanity had changed in ways the elder races never imagined. They had unified their world and ended their internal conflicts. They had mastered sciences that the Dominion had never explored. They had built this fleet specifically because they knew the galaxy would never accept them willingly. Veeler's communications officer whispered an urgent warning. Multiple transmissions were being detected from the Dominion delegation fleet. Every captain was sending emergency messages back to the core worlds. Panic was spreading through the ranks. On the bridge of the USS Vanguard, Commander Brooks monitored the alien communications. He translated the frantic messages for Admiral Hayes. The Dominion officers were terrified. They were calling for reinforcements and warning their leaders about the human threat. Captain Mitchell asked if they should jam the transmissions. Hayes shook his head. He wanted the Dominion to know exactly what had arrived at their border. He wanted every leader and every citizen of the elder races to understand that humanity would no longer be ignored. Ambassador Veeler made one final attempt to assert his authority. He warned that the Dominion would not tolerate aggression. If the humans threatened their worlds, they would respond with overwhelming force that would wipe humanity from existence. Hayes leaned forward in his command chair. His voice dropped to a tone that carried across the void like a promise of death. He explained that they were not here to threaten Dominion worlds. They were here to take their rightful place among the stars. He advised the ambassador to oppose them and discover why the ancient Dominion had been wise to quarantine Earth. Humanity did not forget being caged, and they did not forgive those who thought them unworthy of the cosmos. The transmission ended. Veeler sat in silence on his bridge, surrounded by his frightened crew. His hands were shaking and his hearts were pounding. He had come expecting to intimidate primitives. Instead, he had met a civilization that could destroy everything the Dominion had built. The delegation fleet retreated without firing a single shot. Veeler returned to Prime to deliver his report in person. He stood before High Chancellor and the assembled leaders of the 12 races. He described what he had seen in the border territories. He told them about the human fleet and its impossible size. He shared the words of Fleet Admiral Hayes and the cold determination in the humans' eyes. The chamber erupted in chaos. Representatives from every elder race shouted over each other. Some demanded immediate military action. Others called for diplomatic negotiations. A few suggested abandoning the border territories entirely. High Chancellor listened to the arguments with ancient patience. He had ruled for 500 years and had faced many crises, but he had never faced anything like this. A species they had dismissed as savages had emerged from nowhere to challenge their supremacy. The comfortable certainties of 3,000 years were crumbling around him. Raised his hand for silence. The chamber fell quiet. Every eye turned to the High Chancellor as he considered the impossible situation before him. The Dominion had two choices. They could negotiate with the humans and accept them as equals, or they could fight and risk losing everything their ancestors had built. Made his decision. He ordered Admiral to assemble the combined fleet of all 12 races. They would meet the human armada in battle and prove that the Dominion remained the supreme power in the galaxy. It was a decision that would change the fate of every species in existence. News of the human fleet spread through the Dominion like a plague. Every world and every species heard the stories. A civilization that had been dismissed as primitive savages had somehow built an armada that rivaled the combined might of the 12 elder races. Fear gripped the galaxy in a way it had not experienced for 3,000 years. High Chancellor worked to maintain order as panic threatened to tear the Dominion apart. Emergency councils convened on every major world. Military leaders argued with diplomats. Scientists struggled to explain how the humans had advanced so quickly. Religious figures declared that the end times had arrived. The Grand Assembly met on Prime to debate the crisis. Representatives from all 12 elder races gathered in the Chamber of Unity. The massive hall had witnessed countless historic decisions over the. Now it would witness one more. General and of the Malachite Confederacy demanded immediate military action. He declared that the humans were still primitives regardless of their ships. They had been building mud huts when his ancestors conquered star systems. The Dominion simply needed to crush them before they grew any bolder. Minister of the Republic disagreed. He reminded the Assembly that Ambassador Veeler had reported 10,000 human warships with weapons that matched or exceeded Dominion technology. This was not a primitive species stumbling into space. This was a civilization that had evolved in secret specifically to challenge the elder races. Admiral stepped forward to address the Assembly. His scales had turned a determined shade of crimson. He had spent 3 centuries winning battles for the Dominion, and he refused to believe that any species could defeat him. He requested command of the combined fleet. He promised to meet the humans in battle and teach them the price of their arrogance. High Chancellor asked what would happen if failed. The Admiral's 4 eyes narrowed with absolute confidence. He declared that failure was impossible. The Dominion had crushed every enemy it had ever faced. Rebellious colonies had been brought to heel. Rival empires had been conquered or destroyed. Barbarian hordes had been scattered to the cosmic winds. The humans would be no different. Considered the Admiral's words carefully. He knew that military defeat would mean the end of the Dominion as they knew it. But he also knew that showing weakness would encourage the humans to demand more and more. The elder races had ruled through strength for 3. They could not abandon that principle now. The High Chancellor gave his approval. Admiral would command the largest military force the Dominion had ever assembled. Every race would contribute their finest warships. They would meet the human fleet and demonstrate that the galaxy still belonged to the elder races. 3 weeks passed as the combined fleet gathered near the border territories. Ships arrived from every corner of Dominion space. Dreadnoughts joined cruisers. Malachite carriers flew alongside vessels from races whose names humans had never heard. 8,000 warships formed a battle line that stretched across thousands of kilometers of space. Admiral commanded from the bridge of the Eternal Sovereignty. He reviewed his forces with satisfaction. The combined fleet represented the combined military heritage of 12 ancient civilizations. Their technology had been refined over thousands of years. Their crews had trained their entire lives for war. No enemy had ever withstood such power. Across the void, the human fleet waited in silence. They had not advanced since the meeting with Ambassador Velar. They simply held their position and watched as the Dominion gathered its strength. Fleet Admiral Daniel Hayes stood on the bridge of the USS Vanguard. Captain Mitchell reported on enemy fleet movements. Chief Strategist Amy analyzed Dominion tactics and formations. Weapons Commander confirmed that all human vessels were ready for battle. Hayes studied the tactical display with calm focus. He had expected the Dominion to respond with force. Their entire civilization was built on the assumption of superiority. They could not accept humanity as equals without first trying to prove that the old hierarchy still held. The coming battle was unavoidable. Presented her analysis of the enemy fleet. The Dominion had brought everything they could spare from their border defenses. 8,000 ships crewed by millions of soldiers. It was the largest military force they had assembled in over 1,000 years. Hayes asked how their numbers compared to the human fleet. Reported that the Dominion outnumbered them by approximately 2,000 vessels. However, human ships were individually more powerful, and their weapons were more advanced. More importantly, human crews had trained for exactly this kind of battle, while the Dominion forces had grown complacent after centuries of easy victories. Added that every human weapon system was fully operational, had been loaded with armor-piercing rounds. Missile batteries stood ready. Energy lances hummed with power. The human fleet was a weapon forged over 2 centuries, and it was about to prove its worth. Hayes opened a communication channel to the entire human fleet. His voice reached every ship and every sailor across the Armada. He spoke simply and directly as he had always done. He reminded them of why they were there. For 200 years, humanity had prepared in secret. They knew this moment would come. The galaxy had believed them primitive and unworthy. The elder races had caged them in their own solar system and expected them to die forgotten. Hayes told his people that today they would prove the galaxy wrong. Today humanity would take its place among the stars, not through permission or patience but through strength. All ships were ordered to engage at will. He commanded them to show the Dominion who they truly were. The human fleet surged forward as one. 10,000 warships accelerated toward the Dominion battle line. Engine trails blazed across the darkness like the flames of a coming storm. Admiral watched the human advance with grudging respect. Their formations were perfect. Their coordination was flawless. These were not primitive savages stumbling through space. These were warriors who had prepared for this moment their entire lives. He pushed aside his doubts and gave the order to engage. The combined fleet moved to meet the human armada. 8,000 Dominion vessels formed into attack patterns that had been used for thousands of years. The two fleets closed the distance between them. Weapons powered up on both sides. Targeting systems locked onto enemy vessels. Millions of beings held their breath as the moment of contact approached. The Battle of the Outer Territories was about to begin. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. Admiral gave the command to open fire. 8,000 Dominion warships unleashed their weapons at the same moment. Energy beams and plasma torpedoes streaked across space in a wave of destruction. The barrage contained enough firepower to burn the surfaces of a dozen worlds. It was the most devastating attack the Dominion had ever launched against a single enemy. The Admiral expected to see human ships exploding in flames. He expected panic and confusion to spread through their ranks. He expected the primitives to realize their terrible mistake in challenging the elder races. Instead, he watched his attack splash harmlessly against human shields. The energy barriers surrounding the human fleet absorbed the devastating barrage without failing. Plasma torpedoes detonated against shimmering walls of force and caused no damage. The human ships continued their advance as if nothing had happened. Then the humans fired back. Tactical officer screamed in disbelief at what the sensors were showing. Human weapons technology was not merely equal to Dominion systems. It was vastly superior. Their energy beams cut through Dominion shields like fire through paper. Their missiles evaded point defense systems with impossible precision. Their fired projectiles that accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed. The first volley from the human fleet destroyed over 200 Dominion vessels. Warships that had served for centuries became expanding clouds of debris in seconds. Crews that had trained their entire lives died without ever seeing the enemy that killed them. The USS Vanguard led the human charge. Its massive fired again and again. Each projectile punched through enemy armor and detonated deep inside the target vessel. Captain Mitchell coordinated the attacks with practiced efficiency. She had run this battle 1,000 times in simulation. The reality was exactly as she had expected. Commander Brooks monitored enemy communications from his station. The Dominion channels were filled with panic and confusion. Officers screamed for orders that never came. Captains reported catastrophic damage to their vessels. The disciplined military of the elder races was falling apart under the human assault. Admiral Hayes observed the battle from his command chair. His expression remained calm despite the destruction unfolding around him. This was the moment humanity had prepared for over 2 centuries. Every ship, every weapon, every tactic had been designed specifically to defeat the Dominion in open combat. The elder races had underestimated humanity for 3,000 years. Now they were paying the price for their arrogance. Hayes ordered the flanking squadrons to execute their attack pattern. 200 human cruisers swung around the edges of the Dominion formation. They struck at the enemy rear where defenses were weakest. Explosions blossomed across space as more Dominion ships died. 300 human carriers launched their fighters. Clouds of small craft swarmed around Dominion vessels like angry insects. They targeted weapons arrays and engine systems with surgical precision. The Dominion had fighters of their own, but they were designed to fight primitive raiders, not advanced human pilots flying ships of incredible capability. Commander Torres commanded a squadron of heavy cruisers on the human left flank. His ship, the USS Liberty, shuddered as enemy fire struck its shields. The barriers held firm against the attack. Torres ordered his weapons officer to return fire with all batteries. The Liberty's guns spoke with thunder and flame. 3 cruisers died in rapid succession. Their wreckage tumbled through space as Torres led his squadron deeper into the enemy formation. On the Eternal Sovereignty, Admiral struggled to maintain control of the battle. 2,000 of his ships had already been destroyed or disabled. The human fleet had lost fewer than 50 vessels. The combined fleet was being systematically dismantled by an enemy they had dismissed as primitives. His science officer approached with information that explained everything. The officer was trembling with terror, but he forced himself to speak. He told the admiral that the humans had motivation the Dominion never anticipated. They had been told they were beneath notice. They had been caged in their own solar system and left to die. They spent 3,000 years hatting the races that had rejected them. They spent 200 years building a fleet to prove the galaxy wrong. Understood at last. The humans had not stumbled into space by accident. They had clawed their way to the stars fueled by anger and resentment. Every ship in their fleet was a monument to their determination. Every weapon was designed to hurt the races that had hurt them. The battle raged for 6 hours. The Dominion fleet fought bravely despite the hopeless situation. Officers who had served for centuries refused to surrender even as their ships burned around them. But bravery was not enough against human technology and human fury. When the fighting finally ended, the Dominion fleet had been shattered. 4,000 ships had been destroyed. 3,000 more had been captured or disabled. Only a handful escaped to carry word of the disaster back to the core worlds. Admiral was among those captured. Marines from the USS Vanguard boarded the Eternal Sovereignty and took the Admiral prisoner. He was brought before Fleet Admiral Hayes on the human flagship. The two commanders faced each other on the bridge of the Vanguard, had lost his proud bearing. His scales had turned gray with despair. His 4 eyes could not meet the gaze of the human who had destroyed everything he believed in. The Admiral asked a single question. He wanted to know how the humans had accomplished this impossible victory. Hayes regarded his defeated enemy with something approaching sympathy. He explained that the Dominion had underestimated humanity from the very beginning. They looked at Earth and saw wars and conflicts, and decided the humans were primitive savages. What they failed to understand was that those wars had made humanity strong. Humans had been fighting each other for 10,000 years. They had perfected the art of warfare in ways that peaceful civilizations could never imagine. Closed his 4 eyes in despair, he asked what the humans would do now. Hayes answered without hesitation. He said that humanity would ensure they were never ignored again. They would take their rightful place in the galaxy. Anyone who tried to stop them would face the same fate as the combined fleet. The Admiral had no response. He was escorted to a holding cell to await his fate. Behind him, the human fleet reformed and prepared for the next phase of their campaign. The Battle of the Outer Territories was over. The war for galactic recognition had just begun. The news of the Battle of the Outer Territories reached Prime like a shockwave. Survivors from the combined fleet transmitted their reports across every channel. The mightiest military force the Dominion had ever assembled had been annihilated in a single engagement. Admiral had been captured. Over 7,000 warships had been destroyed or disabled. The humans had lost fewer than 100 vessels. High Chancellor listened to the reports in his private chambers. His ancient body felt heavier than ever before. He had ruled the Dominion for 500 years and had faced countless crises. But he had never faced anything like this. Everything the elder races believed about themselves had been proven false in 6 hours of combat. Panic swept through the Dominion like wildfire. Citizens on 1,000 worlds demanded answers from their leaders. Military commanders argued about how to respond. Some called for total mobilization and a final desperate stand against the human fleet. Others whispered about surrender and accepting whatever terms the victors demanded. The Grand Assembly convened in emergency session. Representatives screamed at each other across the Chamber of Unity. Accusations of incompetence filled the air. Ancient alliances between the elder races began to crack under the pressure of fear. Silence them all with a single raised hand. The chamber fell quiet as every eye turned to the High Chancellor. They waited to hear what their leader would do. Announced that he would meet with the human leader personally. He would travel to the border under a flag of truce. He would hear their demands and determine whether the Dominion could survive this storm. There was no other choice. 1 week later, the High Chancellor's personal transport arrived at the coordinates by the human fleet, looked through the viewport at the armada that had humbled his civilization. 10,000 warships filled space in every direction. Among them floated the wreckage of Dominion vessels, a reminder of what had happened to those who challenged humanity. Human escorts guided transport to the USS Vanguard. The High Chancellor walked through the corridors of the human flagship with as much dignity as he could summon. Armed guards watched him pass but made no aggressive moves. They simply observed the alien leader with quiet confidence. Fleet Admiral Daniel Hayes waited in the formal reception chamber. He stood behind a diplomatic table with his officers arrayed behind him. Captain Mitchell and Commander Brooks flanked their admiral. They showed no signs of hostility, but also no signs of submission. Took his seat across from Hayes. The two leaders studied each other in silence for a long moment. The High Chancellor saw a creature from a species his ancestors had dismissed as savages. The Admiral saw an ancient ruler whose empire had just learned a painful lesson. Spoke first. He acknowledged that humanity had proven its strength beyond any doubt. The Dominion recognized their military superiority. He had come to discuss terms for peace. Hayes nodded slowly. He appreciated the High Chancellor's willingness to negotiate, but he wanted to be clear about what humanity actually sought. They did not want to destroy the Dominion. They did not want to rule alien worlds or enslave other species. That had never been their goal. Asked what the humans did want. Hayes answered simply. They wanted recognition. They wanted humanity to be acknowledged as an equal member of the galactic community. They wanted the quarantine lifted and their worlds open to trade and diplomacy. They wanted their voice heard in galactic affairs. They wanted what should have been theirs 3,000 years ago before the Dominion decided they were too primitive to matter. The High Chancellor considered these demands carefully. He had expected the humans to demand territory or tribute or the dissolution of the Dominion itself. Instead, they asked only for equality. It was remarkably moderate for a species that could have demanded the entire galaxy. Asked what would happen if the Dominion refused these terms. Hayes leaned forward slightly. His expression hardened. He explained that the human fleet would remain on Dominion borders indefinitely. Every ship the elder races built would be matched by 3 human vessels. Every system they colonized would find human settlements nearby. The Dominion would never know peace or security until they accepted that humanity had earned its place among the stars. Silence filled the chamber. Understood that he had no real choice. The Dominion could fight and lose everything, or they could accept humanity as equals and preserve what remained of their civilization. The High Chancellor made his decision. He declared that the Dominion accepted the human terms. Humanity would be recognized as a sovereign power with full diplomatic rights. The quarantine was lifted immediately. Humans were welcome among the stars. Hayes extended his hand across the table. It was a human gesture of agreement that had never seen before. The High Chancellor hesitated for a moment before reaching out to clasp the offered hand. Hayes added one final thought. He asked to carry a message back to the Council of Elder Races. Humanity did not forget those who wronged them, but they were willing to forgive those who acknowledged their mistakes. If the Dominion worked with humanity, they could build something greater than either civilization could achieve alone. But if anyone tried to oppose them, they should remember what happened to the combined fleet. Returned to Prime and delivered the human message to the Grand Assembly. Some representatives protested the terms. Others wept with relief that the crisis was over. But all of them understood that the galaxy had changed forever. 6 months later, the first human ambassadors arrived on Prime. They walked through streets where aliens of a dozen species stopped to stare. These creatures from the quarantined world had emerged from obscurity to reshape the entire galaxy. The elder races watched them with a mixture of fear and respect. On Earth, celebrations erupted across every continent. Humanity had achieved what generations had dreamed of. They had forced the galaxy to recognize their worth, not through patience or diplomacy, but through the strength they had forged over 2 centuries of preparation. Fleet Admiral Daniel Hayes retired from active duty 1 year after the peace treaty was signed. He returned to Earth and spent his remaining years watching as human ships traveled to distant stars. Human colonies spread across worlds that had once been forbidden. Human voices joined the conversations of 1,000 civilizations. Captain Mitchell assumed command of the USS Vanguard. She continued to patrol the borders as a reminder that humanity stood ready to defend its place among the stars. The human fleet remained vigilant even in times of peace. Throughout the galaxy, a new saying spread among the elder races. It was whispered in council chambers and trading posts and military academies. It served as a warning to anyone who might consider challenging the newcomers from the small blue world. Never underestimate the humans. They remember being caged, and they never forgive those who try to keep them there. The arrival of Earth's human had made the entire galaxy tremble. Nothing would ever be the same again.